Hello, everybody, and welcome to RDI's webinar on December 15th, 2022. My name is Gordon Dudley. I'm the CEO of RDI Worldwide, and I'm going to be hosting today's webinar. We are streaming live on LinkedIn, so welcome to everybody who is joining, both from in Korea and around the world. Thank you very much for joining on what is, at least today in Seoul, a very snowy day. So today's topic about implementing a data-driven HR strategy is one that's really important to us. And so that's why we wanted to have a discussion around this. We wanted to provide at least some food for thought and insights around how you might be able to implement in your organizations. And so that's what we're going to be going through today. Whether you are in HR yourself or in the business, whether you are in leadership or an individual contributor, we hope that there will be something useful for you today. On that, let me now move to sharing the contents for today. And we will get right into our session.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our executive webinar, December 2022, topic being implement data-driven HR strategy. I have no doubt that you have already met Gordon Dudley earlier. Let me just briefly introduce myself. My name is Eric Wan, and I'm the principal consultant of RDI Worldwide. My main role within RDI is to ensure that all our HR projects and consultation goes as smoothly as possible. So once again, welcome to the webinar. I'm sure you'll be enjoying this with Gordon hosting it for you guys. And make sure that if you have any questions, you let us know in the live chat, and we'll make sure that we'll answer them. If not today, we'll come back to you later through LinkedIn.
Thanks, Eric. And so everybody on the webinar today has already had a chance to hear my introduction. For those of you joining us for the first time, a very warm welcome. For those returning to our series of webinars, welcome back. It's really great to have you on our webinar live stream today. So, Eric, what are we going to be talking about in more detail today?
In more detail, I think you're here today because we're all interested about how we can implement data-driven HR strategy better. So that is the topic, but more specifically, there are three things that we wanted to touch upon today, Gordon. How exactly can we implement HR strategy that is driven by data analytic, right? What are some of the key things that each one of us can do immediately? So we have a process that we wanted to take you guys through that we find quite interesting, and also we will give you a little bit of perspective on what are some of the barriers from what we have seen while working closely with both HR business partners, HR directors, head of people, and also business leader, CEO, CFO. Like, well, what is holding them back when it comes to implementing a successful data-driven HR strategy? And of course, finally, we will give you some recommendations on what are some of the things that you and your team can get started right away today, tomorrow, right? So all of this is really our perspective from our experience working with CEO and head of people, head of HR. Like, what are some of the things that they find most challenging, and how all functions can work better to use data as something that can drive a people HR strategy. Yeah.
Definitely, we're absolutely key priority for us on this session today is whether you are a head of HR, CHRO, HR director, HR manager, anybody involved in the HR function, or a business leader, whether you are in Korea or outside of Korea. We want to try to give you some practical and insightful advice, information about how you might be able to bring this into your organization. So hopefully, no matter what side of the business you're on, there'll be something for you to take away today.
Absolutely. So whether I think Gordon would have already done a bit of a poll engagement with you guys. So whether you are just getting started with people analytics, you're in the midst of implementing it, or if you're working in an organization that has been using a lot of people analytic to drive HR strategies and policy, whatever stage you are, I'm sure we can have a really good conversation within chat and through some of the topics that we are going to talk about today, provided for you. So Gordon, maybe we can start with a bit of from a higher view on something that is, maybe some of us here would take offended, maybe it's not, I do not know, but something that is quite interesting, right? So we are living in a world that is quite interesting now, right? 2022 stepping into 2023, technology is everywhere. Some of the world's largest, richest company has to do with data. Google, Amazon, social media, Meta, Twitter. Some of these companies, all of them are being at the forefront, so to speak, of using data. But when we look back into our world, right, our world of HR, why do we feel that sometimes as I say, sometimes we're still just getting started when it comes to using people analytics? So the technology development is so fast, right? You can track so much data on your mobile device to your desktop. But why do you think that when it comes to using data analytic, then HR application still is just getting started, right? Still, people are still unsure, and not all the companies are doing it, right? When in reality, it's everywhere, data.
I think it's an absolutely great point, especially at this point in time where, as you rightly say, data analytics is in the media, in the headlines, almost every day of the week, and yet it so rarely has HR in the front of it to be HR data analytics. I'm sure, and I sincerely hope, that we might have some people joining us today whose job title is something around data analytics related to HR, and if you are, then I really hope that you can share your insights as being in maybe one of the top 1% of companies who are already at the forefront of doing that, and we'll share some comments with us later in the Q&A. But the reality is the overwhelming majority, and maybe, dare I say it, more so in Korea, maybe than in other places as well, HR is not usually at the cutting edge of technological development with regards to data analytics, systems integration, and really the adoption of best practice. Why? There could be many reasons for that. I think legacy reasons are definitely a strong one. I think I would also say that, and this is something that we always advocate at RDI, is that HR really needs to elevate itself into a strategic function. In so many organizations, so many industries, perhaps at an even higher rate in B2B and industrial and technical industries more so, HR continues, even in 2022, to be a kind of support function, in some cases a slave to the business functions in an organization, and that's perhaps the single greatest reason, in my opinion, as to why we have this situation.
And to just follow up onto your point, if you really, I think it's something that we'll keep telling you throughout this webinar, is if you really want to use HR data to people analytic to drive your HR strategy, you cannot have a different path than what your business is happening, right? You have to link whatever you do with actual business result, with the actual KPI that your stakeholder can understand. Otherwise, they're not going to look at your data. They will ignore your data, or they will fail to understand what it means for them, right? So I think you have raised a really good point when it comes to staying close to the business, being more strategic business function rather than just a supporting function, right? And there are also some thoughts that I think this is maybe a little bit of a perspective, maybe it's a little bit biased. There's some When it comes to like why some HR functions still finding it difficult to deal with data, some would say that because typically HR people are people and not data people. Do you agree or disagree with that, Gordon?
I think sometimes this is a self kind of fulfilling prophecy. People perceive HR, people in HR as people, and HR people then internalize that and think, yes, I'm a people person. HR, data analytics and all of that is technical and it's not really our domain, and they maybe are slower to look at the uses and benefits of it. So unfortunately, I think it can be one of these kind of becoming reality type of scenarios.
And there's nothing wrong with being people, right? I think a lot of HR are very good at their job, is valuable members of the organization. Their influencing skills, the soft skills, the people skills are absolutely essential for any organizations. But I think one of the data scientists, when she talked about HR analytic, he raised a really good point was, so let's say for everybody involved today, right? Everybody listening today or watching today, let's say you have an employee engagement issue in your organization, right? For HR people, like what is usually the first thing that came to your mind? So if you say data is the first thing that came to your mind, then you're proving us wrong, right? that HR people are not people, only people, but they are much more well-rounded, right? I will be more than happy to be disproven when it comes to this point. But in reality, I think a lot of the time when it comes to employee engagement, first thing that came to people, HR professionals' mind is maybe it's leadership, maybe it's employee welfare, maybe it's compensation, rather than, okay, let's look at the data first and then think about what's the problem here. So maybe that's one thing that why is holding HR back so much. Another thing that I want to bring up is I think that kind of link with what you said, Gordon, on how HR needs to be more a value-adding function, need to be more strategic. And I think that itself plays a part in why analytic can be held back, because simply the fact that because HR is under so much pressure in 2022 to deliver value to the business, sometimes immediately have to really sadly justify the existence, right? I remember one time on LinkedIn, you share one of the, I think, Silicon Valley's CEO, entrepreneur, founder. He thinks that HR function is useless, is obsolete. We don't need HR in our company. So I think HR is under human resource, people function is under a lot of pressure to deliver value. And because data analytic for people, HR is still relatively new kind of a thing, right? We haven't really talked about this in the 80s or 90s. It's something that suddenly pops up through commercial application, and then it became HR application. So we felt that it gives HR less room to experiment, to play around with data, to try to know what to see what really works and really doesn't work when it comes to using data as a tool. Is there something that you have heard from people that you have worked with, from CEO and from CHRO? They describe that I'm under so much value, I'm under so much pressure to deliver, I don't have time to play around.
It is a very, very common thing that we hear from HR managers and HR directors, and I'm sure people on the webinar today will be nodding their heads in agreement that so typically there is insufficient HR headcount within a company. And that really, like you've outlined, means that they are full to capacity in the absolute, deadline-oriented type of work, the most urgent, on-hand projects, in whatever area of HR that is, especially, of course, that's compounded in fast-growing organizations where they're scaling up their headcount, and so that quite naturally leaves so little scope for like you say, trying something new, experimenting, the thought of putting some things on hold whilst we implement a new system is, for many HR managers and directors, just beyond their capacity. But I think the irony that has to be kind of explained here is that in a world where we need to get HR into more of a core function, data is exactly what can be leveraged to achieve that. So I think this is why it's really great and topical to be talking about this at this time, at a period of a lot of change where HR, as you say, is under a lot of pressure.
Yeah. And that brings us nicely to the next section, right? So let's say, because we realize the value of using data and the value of using it to contribute to the business. So where exactly can people get started, right? So from what where exactly can company get started when it comes to using HR analytics? So from what I've seen, it's not just in Korea. I think it's a bit of a worldwide phenomenon that we have seen when it comes to using data for HR purpose. It looks a little bit of this meme that we see quite often on the internet. This is the Spider-Man pointing theme. There very often this is between HR, the leaders, the managers, and also the people who are good at the data, right? The data scientists. So a lot of the time is a bit of a pointing finger and say, so what are we doing? Why are we looking at this? No, you're supposed to do this. No, I'm supposed to look at this. No, I'm not looking at that. You're looking at that. There's a lot of finger pointing, not a lot of alignment on like what to do with the data and what to do with each other. Do you agree with that, Gordon? Do you think there's something that this absolutely is the first thing that need to get sorted out, right? This Spider-Man situation.
For sure. Absolutely. I think it's definitely a lot of kind of passing the responsibility, especially if HR feeling they're full to capacity. It reminds me of a really great data survey that McKinsey ran about a couple of months into the pandemic, around the expected time to implement new systems and go through digital transformation. And there was a huge discrepancy between the expected amount of time that it would take to do something of this nature. Answers were in the order of 300, 400 days, well over a year to implement. And then the reality was that a lot of these things were implemented in 20 or 30 days. So, an order of magnitude 10 times inaccurate, with a kind of a fear that this is something just too big to handle. And in that scenario, that's exactly where the finger pointing happens. If there was a better analysis of what it can take and where the value can immediately and very rapidly assist the business, then probably there would be less finger pointing from the start. And if we're talking about HR data analytics in particular, HR managers would be the ones grabbing onto it and trying to drive it forward.
That's a really good point there, Gordon. I think when you said that because the project looks so huge, so big, then I think a lot of the time stakeholders, when they look at large HR initiative, they usually have a bit of a reaction to, again, this kind of stuff. I think when it comes to applied data analytics, because it's very important for everybody to understand the value of this data when it comes to contributing to the organization's success. And not everybody understand how it is, right? Not everyone understand what EBITDA per employee means, right? Not everybody understand how attrition could impact your future business. I think it's really HR. I think one of the key things, and something that HR is really good at, is to be able to translate some of those data into business terms and what does it mean to the business. Not a huge chunk of data, right? But just bit by bit, little bit by little bit. I think that is something that is a lot of people who are trying to implement data analytics forget, is they try to do too much, too fast. at one particular moment in time, and it overwhelmed people, and then people just back away from it completely. But I think, so we're getting a little bit more process driven now here, right? So I think it's very much aligned with what you said, Gordon. I think when it comes to implementing any sort of HR strategy, but specifically when it comes to HR data strategy, we really want to start with a consultation process, right? You need to start with with your business part, the business partner need to be talking to the functional head, the CEOs, like what problem are we facing right now? Right. Do you feel that this is a conversation that HR can get better at having, Gordon, from your experience working on the both sides of the spectrum with CEOs and head of HR? Can they talk to each other?
I think they can and they do. And I think actually perhaps the problems are already known in a lot of cases, but maybe they are not configured in a way that can be aligned with regards to HR. I think people working in businesses generally know well their organization, they know well their industry. So the problems, the challenges that are faced are well known, but perhaps that next step of where HR can play a role in that, or how the problems actually relate to the role of HR is the element which needs more focus.
So that's very much goes down to the third part of this of these slides. Like, do people actually understand what these data mean? Right? I think if people fail to understand what the data mean or how it impact their part of the business, then there's a very good chance that they will ignore it or they will find it useless. Because I think from professional experience, I remember there was one organization that we worked with suffering a lot of high turnover rate, right? So much so that the head of HR and the CEO realized something needs to be done, right? So they put some measure to make sure that the employees don't leave, don't get burned out. But at the same time, the business leaders, the functional leaders, they have a different set of KPIs. They need to drive numbers. For them, turnover is not a KPI at all, right? So that has a real disconnect when it comes to that. So for them, none of this matter to me, right? So I think the ability to translate how this data impact your data or your KPI become a huge important task for people who wanted to use data to drive HR policy.
Yeah. Actually, you mentioning of that particular case has also reminded me of a similar one where there was a company we were working with a high turnover, and the business managers, the hiring managers, were totally okay with it. And they were okay with it because they felt they didn't have the right people. So you had HR and senior leadership trying to bring this turnover down from a kind of a cost perspective, but actually business managers felt that they weren't getting the right people in the first place. So it was not about a lack of retention. It was a deficit in the recruiting process that was not giving them the right people. And so, there was another great example of where data could actually better enhance the status and allow the right focus area to be narrowed in on.
I agree. I think the focus area, like I really identifying the problem, really is the beginning of this process of using the data as an HR process. And the second things we often ask organization is, do you have a database? Do you have a data inventory, so to speak? Because a lot of the time, HR are already very busy, as you already described, and then they have this issue, they have this consultation process that happened that they need to solve this problem, and then they have to run off to gather data in a very short period of time, right? that itself is really not helpful when it comes to being able to use data correctly, right? Because you're off to collect data in a hurry that you couldn't get off the ground running. Some of the data you might not have, some of the data you might not have looked at before. So one of the second questions that we usually advise people to ask themselves is like, do you have a data inventory? If so, what are they, right? And I think we already talked about.
Just to jump in there,
yeah.
I think what we come across a lot of the time is they have a bunch of data, they have plenty of it, they haven't done anything with it. It's raw, unanalyzed, and at the moment it's not valuable. That's often the case for a lot of companies.
Yeah, and that's really related to the fourth point, right? Like, does the organization, does your HR function, does your business leader have a habit of using people data? I think that has a huge impact on whether or not you can successfully use data to influence them, to help them make better decisions. Is a lot of the time these are not things that they have looked at, right, when it comes to people data. So I think creating an environment where there's a habit of using people data, I think that's very, very important. Like getting people to understand what exactly it means. I mean, in your case, in your case that you just talked about, Gordon, like if your manager doesn't understand how turnover can have an impact on your revenue per employees, then he can't make the connection, right? If he doesn't understand that revenue per employees is much lower if it's a new hire, right? Because it's a new person. Obviously, you need to put more resource into it. Then they will not be able to make the connection and say, you know what, we are looking at the wrong thing here, maybe. Yeah.
For sure. Absolutely.
So when it comes to, I think this is what everybody is here for, right? So when it comes to people data strategy, what is the process? How do we want to tackle this? I mean, quite similar to some of the questions that we already asked in the previous slide is first, you got to start with the consultation process, right? You got to talk to your business leaders, talk to your CEO. Like, what are some of the key issues that need to be solved right now? How I think we already talked about this, but Gordon, I think is worth reiterate, like just how important this process is for HR business partner or head of people.
I think it is just so incredibly important because we've all had those development projects that have gone on for months and months and months. You've put a team member dedicated on it. Maybe an entire task force has been pulled from the business to focus on it. And months down the line, after spending a huge amount of time and resources on it, you find that actually that there wasn't that fully comprehensive alignment of what exactly needs to be focused on, and therefore you haven't gone in the right direction, and you either have to start again and go in the right direction, or of course what's so typical is it's given up at that point because it's already been such a large deviation from what is useful, and it's often deprioritized at that point, which is of course such a shame.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also important to use use your consultative skills as the HR business partner, but also at the same time take empathy. I think is important. You got to understand that you need to start slow to help your CEO, to help your functional leader to understand why this data is important. So I think one really good advice data scientists have given to me is, rather than just going in there and ask your CEO, so what numbers do you want to look at? Like, do you have any ideas how do you want to improve this using people analytics? Rather than going in their code, give them a little bit of sample of what data can do first, so then activate their thinking a little bit better. So, for example, like show them the employee we just talked about this, right? How employee turnover can impact revenue per employee. These are some of the study, and this is some of the model that I've looked into, and it has a direct correlation in our organization. Do you want to know more are you curious about how each one of your employee can make more money? I don't think any competent CEO would say no to that question, right, Gordon?
That's absolute certainty. Absolute certainty. Or, exit interviews. Give them a little taste of. We've now collected the data on the exit interviews that have been done over the last several months, and the number one reason we've found for people leaving the company is, something that we totally didn't expect. We thought that we were doing great on that aspect. Turns out it's the number one reason that people are leaving. That's something that CEOs and business leaders can really get behind.
Yeah, and then that really leads us to the next process of implementing an HR data-driven strategy. Is a lot of HR functions don't have a database, or they don't actually realize that they have a database. I don't know if that makes sense. But I think when we look at database, then I think we have to realize that actually we have more data than we know sometimes. I think exit interview itself, Gordon, you talked about, is a form of data. Doesn't have to be straight numbers, right? Both qualitative and quantitative data can be used to drive your strategy. Exit interview is one, and also performance management records. Those are data as well, right? What are some of the keywords? Do a heat map analysis, right? You can use that to see what are some of the most often words that are being talked about. Like what are some of the competencies, skills? And more importantly, how does that relate it to the business, right? How does that impact the business, right? What are some of the key data impact the business? Like what are some of these key skills can contribute to the business? I think that's really important when it comes to having a data inventory, is realizing that you have data. You just don't know you have it, or you haven't, like Gordon said, you haven't touched it. That's why it's useless right now. And the third part that we wanted to talk about really is the part where you mentioned earlier, if your stakeholder don't understand it, then all of this is useless, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that I've heard in recent times with regards to data is that there are almost boasts of quantity. Oh, we have 500,000 records. We have 17 million records in our database. But of course, with such quantity, there can be, perhaps for a lot of actual decision makers, very little meaning. What can we actually do with that? Is there anything that meaningful that can come out? So I think this is a great point to take on board, especially as HR managers, as we try to get the business on board to go down this data-driven HR strategy. We need to get them interested and excited, and of course the best way to do that is to keep it simple initially, before getting progressively more sophisticated.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the best practices is to create a dashboard of your HR data, so then people can look at it at a glance, people can understand it easily, and if you can relate it to your business strategy, then obviously it's something that your business leaders would be interested to read into, right?
And I think many good dashboards out there, right? A absolute abundance now of different systems, some highly customizable, some off the shelf, some for large organizations, some for small. So really, pick the one that makes the most sense for you, and make sure you get some good advice around what's going to be the most well suited to your organization.
I agree. And finally, I think it's just we talked about this earlier. Like, you have to build in a bit of a culture, a bit of a habit to using data within the organization. And data can't make people use data. It's people who make people use data, right? So I think you have to understand that there's a limitation around data, and you really need to help your stakeholders to get acclimatized to using people data, right? Something that we've seen more effective is regular little data is bigger than a once in a while big data. So what that means is, instead of, I think it's similar to the project situation that you talked about, Gordon, rather than giving them a huge chunk of data and say, this is what's going to happen, blah, 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 and then give them a little bit smaller data that could get them interested more often, rather than once in a while, every quarter, bam, this is our performance management data, look at it.
Or another great example, one that you've always commented on in the past, Eric, is the one time per year employee survey. A one hit. Let's try and capture all the data that we need in 1 week of data collection as we survey as many employees as we possibly can, and let's build an entire annual strategy around that. The days of that being the best option are long gone, and there are many opportunities now to get much more up-to-date current data in order to inform, and that's where a little often is definitely the way to go.
Yeah,
and I think also, sorry, I was just going to say that these nudges, I think what it sparks in my mind is, in meetings, our managers asking for data, our team members bringing solutions backed up by data, because they know that the power of what they are trying to suggest is infinitely greater when it is verified using data. And I think that's the win-win, if you like, both for team members and management in this particular case.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the nudges is so important to just give them a little bit, show them some interesting data every once in a while, regularly, then so they can have the appetite for the data that matters to them. And finally, I think when it comes to that, I think it just goes back to project management, right? The feedback loop, the smaller the better, right? Rather than ask them for some feedback and then come back to them again next quarter to see how things are going. Keep it smaller, right? Go right away. Get them some feedback. Because as I said earlier, we talked about earlier how data analytical for people is still a relatively new field. There's a lot of try and error. A lot of the time, I think what company have experienced, what we've seen is the case of they would buy a off-the-shelf algorithm or model from a vendor, and then they would try to put just input all the data and hopefully the magic would work, right? In reality, a lot of the time it doesn't work like that, because what one set of data means for one organization could mean something that's very, very different without the right kind of context, right? Having your example of retention and turnover is a very good case, right? So you do really need to refine your models over time to make it better. You do really need to relook at the data to verify, are we looking at the right thing? Are we actually even looking at the right problem sometimes, right? So having a small feedback loop would enable you to do that much easier, rather than going back later where the problem is already larger and your stakeholder has already lost of the momentums and energy to engage with you. What do you think are some of the key things that, let's say, okay, I've made up my mind, I really wanted to start using people analytic in my HR function. What are some of the things that you think are must do for our audiences?
So, I mean, we've said it. The first thing is the consultation process. I think HR have a sense already of what the pain points are, and that needs to be translated to the business in order to move forward. I think what all businesses are doing at the end of the year are setting the priorities and targets for next year. And I think that if organizations that are at the end of the scale of really having no use at the moment of HR data analytics, then there is definitely a significant opportunity to begin to involve that into the business going forward and make that a higher priority for sure. I think as I mentioned, in terms of the tools available, because if your company does not have the data scientists in-house that are really working on it, you might be in a smaller organization, then you really do need more of a comprehensive tool to help make use of that data. I would always say be very wary of tools or systems that are one-stop shops. I think any system or tool that claims to be able to do everything from A to Z for your HR function might have limitations. At least in our business, we built our tech stack around specialized tools rather than one that tries to do everything for us, because often they are simply not good enough at the specific uses of it. That's definitely a couple of things that I would say to keep in mind going into next year.
That's definitely really good advice with using the right kind of technology. Thank you, Gordon. And I think one thing that our audience can feel motivated upon, even though they are not data scientists. Maybe there are some data scientists in the audience today. I do not know. Maybe they are. But I think HR does have a lot to offer when it comes to using people data, even though they are not data scientists themselves. For what I mean that is, there's limitation when it comes to the data, right? I think the data is just data, but without the right kind of context, then it cannot be as powerful as it should be, right? So what I mean is a lot of the HR skills that you already have, you have honed those skills all your life, is absolutely important when it comes to using HR analytics, right? Your inferencing skills, your ability to listen to people, to really be the boots on the ground to find out, you know what, the real situation is like this. This data back up, does this data back up the situation or not, right? I think it complements both sides, the hard data and also the HR skills. So I think it's absolutely something that HR professional don't be too demotivated if you feel that, oh, I'm not into statistics and number, I can't do any of this stuff. Doesn't matter, right? I think at the end of the day, people matters, and you are the people expert in this particular, and that really helps make what people analytic powerful is actually the people side of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think I would add just one additional point to that is be open-minded to the potential of data analytics within HR. If this is not going into it already with a clear, fixed mindset around what the outcome might be, there could be all kinds of additional unexpected benefits that come out of a better use and integration of data analytics within your organization. We've seen that time and time again with organizations who have been able to reframe data and have it applied in another way and have additional benefits.
Yeah, I think we talked about this earlier before this recording, that one of our network actually beginning to look at one set of data and then it leads them to another complete dimension, right? I think they are looking into actually remote work, right? Hybrid work is some of the people analytic data that they looked at. They looked at like how can we be more effective when it comes to remote work, to have more meetings, to have more virtual FaceTime over actual physical office. And from looking at those data, they actually find out that, you know what, we actually realize that we don't need to only limit our talent pool in Korea anymore from looking at those remote data. Now they have a much larger talent pool, right? That completely changes the whole HR strategy from this small data of looking at, oh, is remote working effective for us? It became a real game changer for them. Yeah. all of us can do a little bit more is to just start playing around with the data and asking why is it what it is, right? I think it goes back to your point, Gordon, that sometimes you have to keep an open mind with the data, right? Don't go in there thinking that this is exactly what it is, right? It could lead to some very interesting situations. And I would like to say that most HR professionals are smarter than they know themselves. They think they are. I think they need to trust their instinct and trust their guts a little bit better when it comes to people's stuff, because they are the expert in this. And the data is just there to support you on that, right? Yeah. And I think we already talked about this, right? You need to keep it simple. Don't start with some huge project right away. Most likely will scare off people. Most likely people will not have enough of an appetite to swallow such a big chunk of a data, right? Just keep it simple, make it small, build some trust around the data, build some trust around the method, and then keep the feedback loop small, right? Keep going back through it, keep asking questions. I think those are the key points when it comes to either setting up or whatever stage you are when it comes to people analytics. So I think that is key when it comes to using data to drive your people strategy. And I think that the last point, I will leave it to you. I think we already talked about it so many times now, Gordon. Focus on the business priority, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only way to drive something forward in a timely manner with the backing of stakeholders to come to a fruitful conclusion is to focus on the business priorities. I think the more that the data can be framed in a way that will have an impact on the business in all the different ways and metrics that could actually evolve into, definitely the more effective, the more value will come out of any activity, project, strategy that you get into in this area.
Thank you. And so that's all we have for you for today on the topic. I think what we're going to do now is move on to the Q&A section. Maybe there are already some questions in the chat. And so I would hand it over to you to handle the Q&A, Gordon.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for staying with us through the session. I hope you found it interesting and insightful, and it gave you perhaps some ideas of new initiatives that you might be able to engage and start on in the new year, going into 2023. We want to try and keep it as practical as possible, but of course I understand that everybody's unique situation in the company, depending on their organization and the HR structure and the level in which they are working, can be different. And so if there are specific areas or specific challenges, questions that you have around this particular topic, we'd be more than happy to dig into those in more details for you. Please do contact us either directly through our email. I am Gordon at rdiuk.com. Eric is Eric at rdiuk.com, or of course through our LinkedIn page as well. Contact is also on our homepage, rdiuk.com. You can find more information there. And I want to now just, with the remainder of the time that we have on the session, just take up a couple of questions that did come in through in the last couple of days as we were signing up the people to join on the session, and they actually asked their questions in advance. We weren't able to incorporate them into the actual session, but I do just want to quickly cover them off now. And so the first one that came in, which was from a person working here in Korea in HR, and they said that they don't have enough HR staff to be able to take on any extra data analytics projects at this time, even though they do have a lot of data. So I guess this could be a common problem for many organizations. There are so many different areas of HR that could of HR data that could be looked at. From the most kind of performance-related type of employee data, through to even just more in where the area that RDI is working in with talent attraction and acquisition, in terms of not employees, but potential employees, candidates within the recruiting process. Employer branding is another whole topic that is there, and so there's just so many areas. So I totally understand that it can be too much to do. I guess I would hope that I would, within HR, perhaps what you could do, and this kind of just came to me on the spot, but you could actually, if you have some kind of development opportunity through the company, if the company allows you to develop yourself or work on projects on the side, then this could be the area that you use of that particular development, and it would be very much aligned with what you do in HR as well as helping the business. And if you don't have that opportunity, then perhaps within HR you have the power to create that system. So that could be a very interesting project to drive forward in 2023. Build the framework and the way in which you and your company can work on more development type of projects, and then make that your particular project. So that could be an interesting one where you could come around on that particular area. And one other question that did come in, which was a very simple and straight up question, maybe somebody on the call today can also identify, which is, my boss doesn't believe in HR, what can I do? So yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of HR people do feel that from management in organizations where HR isn't given the rightful place at the top management levels of the company as a strategic function. And so what can I do? I think that I would absolutely use some HR data in this case to show the value to the business that HR can bring. We talked about some of the metrics that might come up. The EBITDA per employee, turnover per employee, the types of productivity metrics that can also be brought in, especially if it's kind of a comparison across the business. I think those would be very meaningful pieces of data for management to understand and really see more value in HR. And so that would be my first starting point, would be to use the data to have that discussion around how important HR can be at the strategic level of the company. And I think that would help to influence them down a path of integrating HR better into the discussions. Let me just make a final check as to whether we do have any other questions in the chat box. As we're just wrapping up, I guess we might have time for one last question, but we don't have any coming in there. So with that, I will conclude the session. Thank you everybody for joining on our session today about implementing a data-driven HR strategy. I hope that it has been interesting for you, given some food for thought. I also want to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and look forward to seeing you again in 2023.